Good evening. I'm Belva Davis. Welcome to the world premiere of Day of the Gun. As a television journalist reporting on the explosive events of the 1970s, I saw firsthand the fierce and prolonged struggle which engulfed America and the Bay Area. I covered the free speech movement in Berkeley, the emergence of the Black Panther Party, the anger, protest, and riots of the anti-war movement. Those were dangerous and fearful times. One of the most brutal moments occurred at San Quentin Prison in August of 1971, when inmate, revolutionary George Jackson obtained a gun behind prison walls. The consequences were deadly. To this day, it remains a story filled with mystery and suspicion. Because tonight's special contains graphic pictures and descriptions of violent events, viewer discretion is advised. Now, Cron 4 presents Day of the Gun.
In spite of all, I am human and have done things that require forgiveness from others. I have transgressed against my fellows in moments of weakness and madness. I hope I can make it. George Jackson.
In the fall of 1970, George Jackson skyrocketed to international fame with the publication of his book, Soledad Brother, The Prison Letters of George Jackson. By the next year, he was dead.
George Jackson served a life sentence, which turned out to be a death sentence, for a $70 robbery.
The story of George Jackson is a story of the dark side of America. In August of 1971, when Jackson was a 29-year-old inmate at California's San Quentin Prison, he became the central figure in the prison's bloodiest day. Jackson obtained a gun, and in less than 30 minutes, a murderous rampage turned the adjustment center into a slaughterhouse. 6 men, including Jackson, were killed.
It was unprecedented. It had never, ever happened before. It's never happened again.
During his prison life, George Jackson was a polarizing figure, hated as much as he was loved.
He was a threat in the prison system. He was one that just didn't seem to be very afraid.
He was defiant, he was proud, he was a revolutionary.
George Jackson was a thug. My guess is that he stole lunch money from his grade school associates.
He educated himself and emerged as the most powerful intellectual within the prison system.
He was a punk convict until he was catapulted into the spotlight. Once in the limelight, I think he rose above punk convict, but I think he never rose above opportunist.
In the end, when George Jackson's cause had been lost and the cult of hero worship contaminated his heart and soul, Jackson sought comfort in a few loyal friends, Marx, Lenin, and Ho Chi Minh, the Vietnamese revolutionary who predicted, "When the prison gates fly open, the dragons will emerge." On a hot August day, with gun in hand, Jackson would tell the world just that.
I'm hopeful, and I will try with best I can with everything I've got to end this battle and to return our sons to their desires.
We realize that we're shedding blood now, we're being killed.
The ascendancy of George Jackson came at a time when America's soul and its people were coming apart.
That this is revolution.
We will not be fooled.
The turbulent decades of the 1960s and 70s merged as one. The country's democratic institutions were severely challenged. Some advocated revolution.
I'm going to start right now to inform white people of what they don't know.
The black people in this country have been the victims of violence at the hands of the white man for 400 years.
I think it's un-American.
We cannot survive if we go fight some yellow man in Vietnam who ain't never called us nigger.
You're nothing but a bull, child-ass mother who doesn't give a when somebody is down.
People had marched, people had gone to jail, people were very frustrated and very angry.
The unpopular war in Vietnam had become the longest and most divisive in American history. The bitter struggle for civil rights confirmed the failed promise of equality for all.
We'd been consigned to the ghetto for years and years and years. We'd not been allowed to break out of the ghetto.
Riots turned American cities into burning embers. The political assassinations of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Kennedy deepened the country's paranoia.
We were being put in a position of having to feel that our lives were under the gun.
Huey P. Newton and the Black Panther Party wanted justice beyond the streets of Oakland.
There were, I suppose, those who felt that all one needed to do was to take up the gun, and that would be the path toward freedom.
The prisons of California had become a target for revolutionary change as well. The New Left viewed the growing convict population as symptomatic of the country's deeper social ills.
We've got the militant blacks, the militant Nazis, the militant Chicanos. They're all here under one roof, and we are sitting on this lid like a tea kettle waiting for the steam to either come up or the lid to blow off.
Inmates were championed as political prisoners, vanguards of the coming revolution, victims of their fascist capitalist oppressors.
As long as there is any political prisoner in this country, as long as anyone is being discriminated against, none of us are free.
When George Jackson emerged as the new god and leader of the left, those on the right saw him as the most powerful threat in the prison system.
I think racism is a control device, control mechanism, create an atmosphere whereby they can control inmates. And black is just a continuation of the same thing we've been going through on the street.
George Jackson was born in Chicago in 1941, one of 5 children in a poor working-class family. His mother, Georgia, was afraid of what the streets could do to him.
She wouldn't let him go out and play. She kept him up on the roof. She wouldn't let him go out because she didn't want him to get in trouble.
I used to tell them that they were black, and in order to achieve, they'd have to be twice as good as white. I said, if you're twice as good as a white in school, then maybe you'll make something. Yes, that's what I used to tell them. It was the truth. So why hide it from them?
As a young boy at Catholic school, Jackson experienced racism. The playground was for white kids only. Growing up in the projects, he became involved in petty crime, fighting, stealing.
At age 15, his parents moved to LA and they settled in the Watts district, where he began to be involved in a little bit more serious crimes, stealing a motorbike, breaking and entering. In 1958, he was convicted of a store burglary and sent to CYA, California Youth Authority camp, for several months. He escaped, fled back to Chicago, was involved in a knifing, came back to California in chains.
After spending time locked up in the California Youth Authority, Jackson graduated to state prison when he pled guilty to the robbery of a Bakersfield gas station. It was 1961. Jackson was 19 years old, and he received the indeterminate sentence of 1 year to life.
Well, I was incarcerated under a 1 to life, a term they called for 1 to life, where I could have done 1 year and been released. I've done 10. That's more time than anybody in the state has ever done on a 1 to life.
According to fellow inmate James Carr, when the two became leaders of a gang known as the Wolf Pack, much of their time was spent in the usual convict hustles: gambling, booze, sex, blackmail.
He knew how to play the game. He was a tough guy. He studied martial arts. He was, he was strong, very muscular, very smart, very cunning guy.
Good behavior dictated Jackson's chance for parole. It became non-existent. Prison records indicate that he received over 40 disciplinary actions. Jackson spent 7 years in solitary.
He was a big guy. He was a tough guy. He was a predator when he was in the general population. He was a predator of other inmates. He just abused people.
He became a professional prisoner, a real dyed-in-the-wool convict.
And then he started reading revolutionary theory. Then he started reading Marx and Lenin and Mao. And he wrote, "I read Marx and Lenin and Mao, and they redeemed me." All of a sudden, he had a context for his anger. He realized, why he was there, why people of his race, of his working class background, why they were in prison in disproportionate numbers. And that was the appeal of George Jackson. He represented in the highest way the injustice of the system and the cruelty and the institutionalized racism of the system.
Coming up on Day of the Gun, inmate killings at Soledad Prison begins a chain of revenge and murder.
We now return to Cron 4 Presents Day of the Gun. This program contains graphic pictures and descriptions of violent events. Viewer discretion is advised.
We die too easily. We forgive and forget too easily. Gentle and refined people, aren't we? We'll make good communists if someone deals with the fascists for us.
In January of 1970, George Jackson was one of more than 2,000 inmates at Soledad Prison. Jackson had been here before. Located 100 miles south of San Francisco, the prison was in the heart of the fertile Salinas Valley, the Salad Bowl of America, the place where famed author John Steinbeck wrote eloquently of the dispossessed. When Soledad opened in 1951, it was the model for the California prison system, a showplace for reform. By the next decade, that hope had vanished.
Well, it was gladiator school. Of course, you had your gangs, you had your AB, Aryan Brotherhood, you had your BGF, your Black Guerrilla Family, you had the Mexican Mafia.
Soledad was a racist pit. It was a horrible, horrible place. I mean, the guards set the prisoners against each other. There were conspiracies everywhere. There were stabbings. There were murders.
The guards were the enemy, the number one enemy, because they were killing both of us. And George was trying to explain this to a lot of guys. They couldn't get it to their heads.
Alan Mancino has spent much of his life behind bars, beginning as a teenager in the California Youth Authority. Like George Jackson, Mancino was from Los Angeles. Though the barrier of race allowed him to know Jackson only by reputation, the circumstance of their prison lives would crisscross in moments brutal and vicious, from Soledad to the tragedy at San Quentin.
The administration had him down as a troublemaker, as an instigator and agitator. He wasn't. He wasn't into the racial stuff, I'll say that about it.
I went through all the processes. I tried to get out. I went to school, program, but now on the side, I was studying things that I felt that would help the community.
George Jackson was a prisonized, tough, sometimes brutal prison gangster. And this prisonized toughness made him the best proselytizer for revolution on the yard.
At Soledad, the charismatic Jackson conducted secret political study groups with other inmates, trying to unify the prisoner class.
He was an internationalist. He identified with international communist solidarity.
And one of the projects he took on was that of transforming those who were behind bars, to move away from what he called a criminal mentality to a revolutionary mentality.
And then he had the capabilities of mobilizing everybody. You know, if he said, hey, we're going to do this here, we do this here. And then when they saw this kind of power that could come from one person, naturally they feared that.
On the morning of January 13th, 1970, a new exercise yard was opened at Soledad's notorious O-Wing. The prison grapevine had long predicted that a fight between black and white inmates would occur. Revenge was the motive because of the previous racial killings of blacks.
I would say the majority of people in Soledad knew that when the new exercise yard was open, that there would be a fight out there.
At around 9 a.m., a racially mixed group of inmates began entering the yard. W.L. Nolan, a prison boxing champion and Jackson's closest political ally, was among them.
And we said, well, get on the court, basketball court. Everyone pick your man. When everyone's set, then we'll do it.
The guard in the tower was O.G. Miller, white, 51 years old, known to be an expert with a rifle. Miller's background was similar to that of other guards. Ex-military, from a southern state, known to inmates as a racist.
He was going to shoot somebody black. If it was a fight out there on the yard or somewhere, he wasn't going to shoot his kind. He was going to shoot the other guy.
The fight started when Nolan threw the first punch at a white inmate. Others quickly joined the battle.
But as soon as they started scuffling, shots rang out.
Without warning, Officer Miller fired his weapon at the inmates.
Nolan was the first one shot. He was shot through the chest on the first bullet off of a .30 caliber, very high-powered rifle. He was shot right in the heart.
It was straight up murder.
A second, then a third shot fired, hitting two other black inmates. Both would bleed to death. A white inmate had also been wounded.
And even Billy Harris, the one who really hated blacks, said that we thought we were just going to fight. Nobody really get killed. We get, maybe some bruises and head bashing, but that'd be it.
3 days later, on January 16th, the Monterey County Grand Jury ruled the killings justifiable homicide.
There was just a thickness of anger and a sense of injustice that had occurred.
You just didn't kill us like that. And then dudes were saying like, damn, we dying, why are we dying by ourselves? And that was the attitude that everybody,
Not long after the ruling had been announced, outrage turned into retribution. At around 6:30 p.m., 26-year-old guard John Mills was beaten and thrown from the top tier of Y-Wing.
Absolutely in the wrong place at the wrong time.
A lot of people were glad. A lot of people were glad, white and black.
Mills was killed not because he was Mills, it was because he was a guard, to pay back for the Opie Miller shooting.
There was a note left on him. 1 down, 2 to go. That was stated really clearly.
According to prison authorities, there were inmates, black and white, who witnessed the killing of Officer Mills.
And the thing that killed me was them saying that they could hear Mills's keys jangling in the air as he fell or was thrown from the third tier down to the bottom.
George Jackson, Fleta Drumgo, and John Clouchet became the primary suspects in the killing of Officer Mills. Clouchet denied any involvement.
So you were not involved in the assault or killing of John Mills?
No.
Did you see anyone assault or kill John Mills?
No.
Do you know if George Jackson, in fact, killed John Mills?
No.
Jackson, however, was a marked man. According to Alan Mancino, prison guards took him to a secret meeting. They believed Mancino was an assassin for the Aryan Brotherhood.
They wanted me to take out George Jackson. They was going to open the cell up and open his cell up at the same time. And they wanted me to take him out. So I got word down to Jackson. That's the first time I've never really talked to him, never associated with him. I shot him a kite. I told him what was going on in the watching cell, that I wasn't going to do it.
A kite is prison slang for a letter.
Because I didn't want to kill him. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be involved in that. I had a grudging respect for the man. The way he conducted himself, and a lot of people hate him without reason.
In February, George Jackson, John Clouchet, and Fleta Drumgo were indicted for murder. Known as the Soledad brothers, the case of the three inmates would become a cause célèbre. John Mills was the first guard murdered at the prison. He left behind a wife and son.
Was the incident for which you're charged now, was it a revolutionary act on your part?
You asking me to confess to something? As a
Unless you want to, did you kill the man?
Look, one of the most important elements of guerrilla warfare is to maintain secrecy. I've killed nobody until, it's been proven. And they'll never be able to prove anything like that.
mp4 presents Day of the Gun. This program contains graphic pictures and descriptions of violent events. Viewer discretion is advised.
Dearest Angela, I hope that by some means you have discovered that I love you deeply and would touch you tenderly, warmly, fiercely, if I could, if my enemies were not at present stronger.
Black militant Angela Davis was among the most impassioned who rallied to the cause of George Jackson.
George himself had become that symbol whom we absolutely had to save. The first time I met him was on the occasion of one of the court appearances in Salinas, California.
Davis was one of 4 children, raised in a loving home by her school teacher parents in the racial hatred of Birmingham, Alabama. Acknowledged as a brilliant scholar, Davis studied Marxism and joined the Black Panthers. After a controversial fight, she was fired from her position as an assistant professor at UCLA for being a member of the Communist Party. It was during this time that Davis became involved with the Soledad Brothers Defense Committee and George Jackson.
At that time, I thought of him as emblematic of the oppression sustained by Black people. The 3 of them were in chains. It certainly evoked slavery.
Viewed by some as the glamour couple of the revolution, Davis and Jackson formed a close personal relationship, sharing the same vision for political change.
And it was, upon seeing him, very refreshing to realize that he was a human being, that he had joy in his heart.
Davis also became friends with the Jackson family and teenage brother Jonathan, who idolized George.
And I think came to imagine his own life as worth nothing if it could not be used to free his brother.
I have a young, courageous brother whom I love more than I love myself, but I have given him up to the revolution. I accept the possibility of his eventual death, as I accept the responsibility of my own.
In the summer of 1970, Jonathan Jackson celebrated his 17th birthday. Friends at Jackson's Pasadena High School described him as warm, full of humor, never in trouble with the law. He also had an IQ of 117.
He just wanted to make sure that George was not kept in jail. He wanted to make sure that George was freed. He felt like that George had been done an injustice.
Jonathan would write, "I have one question to ask all of you. What would you do if it was your brother?"
Jonathan, being a young guy, and decided that, you know, he was going to get his brother out of prison by any means he could, and if it meant going there and taking hostages and exchanging hostages for his brother's freedom, he was willing to do that. And that was the plan.
On the morning of August 7th, 1970, at approximately 10:45 a.m., Jonathan Jackson walked into the Marin County courtroom of Judge Harold Haley. Within moments, Jonathan pulled out a pistol, carbine, and a 12-gauge shotgun. He announced that he was taking over, adding, "This is it. Everybody freeze." Weapons were given to inmates James McLean, William Christmas, and Rochelle McGee. As Judge Haley, Assistant District Attorney Gary Thomas, and 3 housewives who were serving as jurors were taken hostage, the gunman also stated, "We are the revolutionaries. The Soledad brothers must be freed." Taped under the neck of the 65-year-old judge was a shotgun.
As they got out here, then this other bushy-haired, light-haired one came out. He had the automatic weapon. And he came out, and about this time, the one that had the gun on Judge Haley turned around and saw me. And he says, "Kill that mother." He says, "Kill him, kill him, kill him."
Jonathan and his fellow gunmen led the hostages to a van in the parking lot of the Civic Center.
By that time, the van was surrounded by various law enforcement people, including guards from San Quentin who just happened to be nearby practicing shooting.
The guards' prison training included the no hostage rule. It meant negotiating for hostages would not happen. With Jonathan Jackson behind the wheel of the van, its human cargo was driving straight into the path of a San Quentin sergeant.
He did not have radio contact with the sheriff or anybody else. He did not know that the sheriff of Marin County had said, "Let the van go." So he told his officers to fire.
So they're the two really fired the first shot and hit Jonathan first. And a lot of the shooting inside the van was done by the assistant district attorney at the time, Gary Thomas. When one of the convicts went down, the gun fell on the floor. He picked it up and started firing, killing the other inmates inside.
When the gunfire ended, Jonathan Jackson, William Christmas, and James McLean were dead. Rochelle McGee was wounded, as was one of the female jurors. Assistant DA Gary Thomas suffered a gunshot to his spinal cord and would be paralyzed from the waist down for life. In the frenzy of violence, the shotgun under the neck of Judge Harold Haley was triggered, killing him.
When a shotgun goes off in someone's face, you can imagine how the kind of destruction and the gruesome effect of that, and so it was quite a shocking scene.
I'm saying that there was no conspiracy, that Jonathan, a 17-year-old man-child, was working according to the dictates of his own mind.
George Jackson would later declare, that he was proud of his brother Jonathan's military action, adding, "He was the true revolutionary, the black communist guerrilla in the highest state of development."
I'd be the last one to say that Jonathan had suicide in mind. I'm certain that Jonathan felt that the police would have some concern, would give some concern to the lives of those 5 civilians. I'm thinking that Jonathan was trying to demonstrate to the public, to the people, just how he felt that these problems should be solved.
I think that he was led to believe that it was possible, even by George himself. I think George encouraged this. I think George put him up to it.
It's very tragic that he died at such a young age. I don't think many of us realized how exclusively focused he was on George.
Nobody knows what he was thinking except Jonathan. But I think he did it for love of his brother and his country. He was trying to wake the people in this country up to the fact that black people had nothing.
Because some of the weapons used by Jonathan Jackson were bought and registered by Angela Davis, law enforcement officials believed Davis was a co-conspirator. Davis fled and became a fugitive from justice, the object of a nationwide manhunt by the FBI. Her wanted poster listed charges of murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy.
Well, I left because I did not think there was any possibility of justice. I didn't have any choice. It wasn't something I wanted to do. It was something I had to do.
You're driven by fear.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
2 months later, the 26-year-old Davis was arrested in a New York City motel. After her return to California, she was taken to the Marin County Jail and locked up 1 floor above the courtroom where Jonathan Jackson had taken the hostages.
The Jonathan Jackson thing put us on the alert to specifically reinforced our belief that there are people out there, radicals out there, willing to do most anything in order to make their point or to free George Jackson.
The real fatal irony of the Marin County courthouse shootout is that after Jonathan's death, George Jackson's death becomes inevitable. George Jackson had to transform himself finally into the dragon, the shaman, the priest, the convict of revenge.
Coming up on Day of the Gun, George Jackson wants...
We now return to Cron 4 Presents Day of the Gun. Viewer discretion is advised.
Dear Mama, I'm going to night school again and have encountered no trouble of late. They say today is Mother's Day. I can't make much sense of it, though. I love mine every day.
You know, there are many black people in this country who have faith in the courts. They believe they can get justice. I used to believe it myself, but not anymore.
What happens to George now? What do you expect?
I don't know what will happen to George.
In the summer of 1970, after the location for the trial of the Soledad brothers had been moved to San Francisco, George Jackson, John Clouchet, and Fleta Drumgo were transferred to San Quentin's Adjustment Center, the AC, home to the prison's most dangerous inmates, where the animosity between guard and convict was mutual. In October, Radical Chic came to the gates of the prison when a champagne party of 150 people was held to celebrate the release of Jackson's book, Soledad Brother. Though some in the prison system would dispute Jackson's credibility as author, the book was the apex of his prison transformation.
It was a very personal book, a very novelistic book, and a book that portrayed George Jackson very unrealistically as a victim, a martyr of the prison system, which he was not. If there's anything that George Jackson was not, it's a martyr.
Soledad Brother became a sensation, an international bestseller praised by the New York Times. Jackson was called the successor to Malcolm X. Black Panther Huey P. Newton said, "George was the greatest writer of us all."
George Jackson had the understanding of what comes from the ground. What is the lowest moment in humanity?
The letters to my family, my mother, my father, sisters, my brother, Jonathan, they were intended to familiarize them with the situation I was faced with here. Of course, here in prison, we see the repression, the exploitation, the victimization of lower class peoples.
The book offered many sides to Jackson's personality. There were epistles on slavery, the evils of capitalism, adoration for Cuban revolutionary Che Guevara. Jackson wrote often to his mother, Georgia, revealing their disagreements and love. He also corresponded with his father, Lester, a man whom Jackson believed had been defeated by a racist society.
How do you think I felt when I looked in your face, saw the clouds forming, and see your best efforts go for nothing? I count the times on my hands that you managed to work up a smile.
The book was also a public relations triumph for Jackson's attorney, Faye Stender. Stender was tireless in making her client and prison letters famous throughout the world.
And she really was involved in making George Jackson a celebrity.
Jackson affectionately called the well-known 39-year-old Berkeley lawyer his small but mighty mouthpiece.
Afraid for their lives if they testify or are even friendly to the defense in the Soledad brothers case. And as
Breakfast with Jonathan at various times.
Faye Stender also convinced a fellow radical attorney, John Thorne, to join Jackson's case, a case which Stender believed needed to be tried in the court of public opinion.
She was diminutive, smallish, brilliant mind, knew exactly what she wanted.
When Stender organized the Soledad Brothers Defense Committee, engaging famous names like actress Jane Fonda to raise money and notoriety, Stender wanted to create an atmosphere of acquittal.
It is incumbent upon all of us to speak out about it, to make it known to the public what is happening in this country, that there are political prisoners, political trials.
But in the days and months after his brother Jonathan's death, some began to see a change in George Jackson's personality.
He acted like he didn't care about anything anymore after that. He was more introverted. He seemed like he got irritated at things more quickly and stuff, you know. Like one day, I don't know, some guard did something to him in the visiting room. He got in a hell of a fight with him in the visiting room. Yeah, he changed a lot.
Others believed Jackson's years in incarceration had limited his real-life view of the outside world.
And his idea was that there was an actual shooting revolution going on outside in the streets of the Bay Area. So what we're looking at here is a very, very isolated, restricted worldview, maybe even delusional, one might say.
Jackson's relationship with Faye Stender also came to an end. They clashed over the distribution of proceeds from his book.
George Jackson said, "No, I want to build a revolutionary movement. I'm getting out of here. And I want my money to go towards my friend James Carr, who was a prisoner who had been released, who was organizing and building a little army on the outside." And that's how they parted ways.
Gregory